Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me okay in the back, in the front? Excellent. My name is Jonathan Stuhlman. I'm Senior Curator of American Art here at the Mint Museum, and one of the co-curators of Southern Modern, the exhibition upstairs. And on behalf of Dr. Todd Herman, our President and CEO, and Beth Cortapella, Chair of our Mint Museum Board of Trustees, welcome to the museum for our Amazing Grace program and the final day of the Southern Modern exhibition. Unfortunately, Todd and Beth are en route to Mexico for a museum trip right now, so I wanted to welcome you on their behalf. Before I thank the individuals and sponsors who have made Southern Modern and its accompanying programs possible, I would like to read the Mint Museum's Land and Labor Acknowledgement, which is our formal statement recognizing the indigenous peoples who originally inhabited this land where the event is taking place. The Mint Museum sits on colonized land traditionally home to the Catawba, Cheraw, Sugaree, Waxhaw, and all other indigenous peoples who resided, met, and traded here. The Mint also acknowledges the unpaid and hidden labor of enslaved peoples of African ancestry who helped to construct the Mint Museum's building on Randolph Road at various stages in its history. Southern Modern is an exhibition organized by the Mint Museum featuring more than 100 works of art borrowed from more than 50 individual lenders. It has traveled to 3 other museums, the Georgia Museum of Art, the Frist Art Museum, and the Dixon Gallery and Gardens, before arriving here in Charlotte for its final stop. It's accompanied by a fully illustrated catalog with numerous scholarly essays, which if you haven't seen it, please take a look. It's up in the galleries, and we have it down in our shop. And all of that would not have been possible without major support from the following: for the national tour, the Henry Luce Foundation, the Terra Foundation for American Art, the Wyeth Foundation for American Art, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Betsy and Alfred Brand Fund here at the Mint Museum. The exhibition was presented locally with funding from Wells Fargo and the Dowd Foundation, as well as Mint Museum patrons, Julie Bolt and Dhruv Yadav, Lucy and Hooper Hardison, Posey and Mark Mealy, and Rocky and Curtis Trenkelbach. Before we jump in, I'd also like to thank Cynthia Moreno and her wonderful staff and our learning and engagement team for all of the things that they put together, both throughout the run of the show, but also everything you see here today. It's a lot behind the scenes to make an event like this happen, and I'm very grateful to them. So I thought today I would tell you a little bit about the exhibition broadly, and then come in more narrowly to the specific painting that we built this program around. So to begin, Southern Modern is the first exhibition to bring together this many works from this period made in the South. And the South is a region that is typically left out of our American art history when you learn it. When I went to college, when I went to graduate school, when you would study this period, you'd think there was nothing happening here. There's a famous quote from a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1949. So right in the middle of the span of this show, the show examines art made between about 1915 and 1955. And in 1945, this curator at the Met in New York said that nothing of merit was made south of Baltimore, period. And that attitude is pervasive. And as we know, history is a changeable thing. And one of the things that we've really tried to do here at the Mint Museum is to add voices to the story of American art history. And the show really started when I got here, and I started seeing works in our collections that I thought were really outstanding by artists that were not part of my training and were not part of my background. And as I got to know other museums in the South and collectors, and got to know the South and its artists, I kept seeing more and more of it. And so we really wanted to pull together the very best of what was being made here to make the point that there were important works of art and important artists working in the South and making work about the South during this period where it's been left out of art history. There have really only ever been 2 major exhibitions that have looked at the art of the South in a comprehensive way like this. The first, on the left there, is Painting in the South, 1564 to 1980, that the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts did in 1982 or 83. As you can see, that covered a much broader time span. There was a section on art from this period. And then the other show was done by the Georgia Museum of Art in the 90s, The American Scene in the South, which looked specifically at kind of paintings of everyday life in the South during this time period. Our show is a little bit broader. It looks at both artists working towards, with modernist ideas, towards abstraction, as well as these works depicting everyday life in the modern South during the period. We started thinking about this show, as I said, I started thinking about it when I got here, which was back in a long time ago, 2006 now. In 2013, we brought together this group of people from across the South to really talk about what a show like this could look like. All of these people are curators or museum directors or collectors, or people from Centers for the Study of Southern Culture at universities. And we started to talk about what the parameters of the show might look like. And ultimately, I picked as a co-curator for the show Martha Severance. Martha had been a curator at the Greenville County Museum of Art for a long time, and they specialized in Southern art. So where I was still learning about the art and artists of the South, Martha had a deep history there. And as we put the show together, we came up with our initial checklist based on our research of artists we thought we should include. But then we sent that checklist out to colleagues, again, across the South and Southeast, and said, hey, curator in New Orleans, is there an important artist working in New Orleans that we've overlooked, and so on. So we really tried to be as comprehensive as we could in who we were including, but we also recognized this as a starting point for future scholarship, and I'd be thrilled if there were a dozen artists that we hadn't known about for the show and someone brought them to light after this. So I think the case with art history, you have to shine a light on what's not being represented in order for it to be incorporated more fully into future histories. So that's what we're trying to do with this show. Once we got the checklist for the show, we really let the works of art, we picked the best works of art that we could, period. Because the point is that there's really amazing things being made in the South. And then we really let those works kind of tell us what the sections of the show should be. And we ended up having 7 sections of the show. If you haven't seen it upstairs, you'll go through. I'll just have a work or two from each of those. So there's one called Southerners that shows artists exploring the people of the South. And it includes everything from Marie Hull's wonderful painting, An American Citizen. Now, this doesn't look to our eyes like a modern leaning painting. It's very representational. It's a beautiful rendition of this man, John Wesley Washington, who she knew. But she's posing, I think, a very modern and progressive question with the title of this painting. Very specifically, it's called An American Citizen, not Portrait of a Gentleman, not Portrait of John Wesley Washington, as other images that she made of him were. And she writes about this, and she says, and you can see she's painted him in red, white, and blue with his blue and white shirt and his red tie. She says about this, that this gentleman, she found so moving that he had been born into slavery, and during his lifetime, had seen his status as an American citizen, he gained that status, but I think she's also posing a question. In Jackson, Mississippi in 1936, did he truly also have all of the rights of an American citizen? So a progressive modernist question, I think, with the title of this painting versus a modern style. So we have everything from that to scenes of, like Lamar Dodd's bargain basement, showing both black and white shoppers in the Pizzett's department store in Birmingham, Alabama in the 30s. Of course, if you're doing the South, you have to have a section of the landscape. So some wonderful scenes, some of which incorporate the South's red clay, like Nell Choate Jones's painting where we've got the furrowed roads and furrowed fields. Or Romar Bearden's work, some of his early paintings from the 40s that focus back on his memories, the stories he heard about growing up in the South. So here, cotton workers bringing the harvest to the cotton processing mills. You also see during this period the growth of cities and industry in the South. And so on the left there, Richard Blauvelt Coe working down in Birmingham, capturing the explosive growth of the steel industry there that was producing steel that helped future growth, fuel growth not only in the South but across the country. All the way to Benjamin Wigfall, a young black artist in Richmond who painted this picture, Chimneys, when he was in his early 20s. And it was the first work of art by an African-American artist to be bought by the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So he's taking a look at the buildings and architecture of the city around him and drawing inspiration from them. There's a section on religion and ritual. Some of the paintings in there, like this one, for example, draw their inspiration from spirituals. So this is Roll, Jordan, Roll. In general terms, a song about navigating the challenges of life to try to get to the other side. Broadly speaking, heaven. When this song was used in the 19th century, especially by enslaved African Americans. It was, the meaning was taken to be moving from the South to the North for freedom and the struggles that entailed. Here in the 1930, when Melvin Johnson painted it, perhaps referencing again the Great Migration from South to North of African Americans seeking better situation during the Jim Crow South in the North. But a wonderful kind of modernist take on that song. Oh, sorry. We have a small section on the growth of colleges and universities and art programs. Up until this time, it was hard to find artistic training in the South, but in the 30s, you really see the growth, the opening of museums, like the Mint Museum in 1936 and many others. And you start to see colleges, HBCUs, really starting to open the doors with art programs where professors like Lois Milo Jones here, who taught first at the Palmer Institute near Greensboro, and then eventually was a longstanding professor at Howard University. She, Hale Woodruff, many others, really made it so that artists didn't have to leave the South to seek education, and that was all happening. Those programs were being established during this period. And then finally, a section on the many different ways that Southern artists engaged with modernist ideas. Everything from an early painting by Alma Thomas here, where she's looking to Cubism and the work of Paul Cézanne, absorbing those lessons before she moved on to create her probably better known wonderful colorful abstractions. All the way to Howard Thomas, painting in a very abstract expressionist style here in a painting called Hilltown. So those are 6 sections of the show, and they're all important. They all show us something about life in the South during this period and what artists were doing, how they were engaging with it. But the final section of the show that I haven't talked about yet is maybe one of the most challenging, but one that we thought was really important to include. Because if we're going to tell the story of the South, we can't just tell a story of growth and progress and beauty, because it was a difficult time. So there's a section called the Jim Crow era. And in this section, we examined the prejudices that existed during the South at this time, the segregation. So for example, this painting by George Biddle, Folly Beach Pavilion, shows Folly Beach near Charleston, South Carolina. At the time, it was a segregated beach. So there's one lone black figure in this painting. She's not at the beach enjoying her day. She's there working, taking care of those two kids. And I love, if you see this painting, the caricatures in it are amazing. But I just love the way she's looking out at the viewer with that eye lowered, just letting you know that she is not having fun at the beach. Then there are other works in this section, often by African-American artists and often not created in the South. James Porter was, like Lois Milo Jones, an important professor at Howard University. This is his painting from around 1939, When the Klan Passes By, showing the ever-present danger and threat that black residents of the South felt during this era, even in the comfort of their own homes, the safety, one would suppose, of their bedroom. You see a family huddled together, the mother putting a protective arm around the child glancing over towards the father who's leaning back from the window. It's hard to see here maybe, but clutching a shotgun, because who's going by outside is the sheriff and the KKK figure. So Porter's showing that kind of ever-present danger. And the other side of the screen, Elizabeth Catlett, from a series of prints that she did that explored the lives and various aspects of lives of black women during this period. Some of them celebratory, some of them like this one, called And a Special Fear for My Loved Ones, that touch on that fear that women might have felt when their son, their husband, went out for the day, might not come back that night because of something that had happened. So here very clearly showing a lynched figure lying on the ground. But both of these scenes, I think, would have been almost impossible for artists in the South, working in the South, to make. They would have been dangerous to really be shining the light on what was happening. So Porter's working in D.C. Catlett, by this point, has left the country entirely to go to Mexico to pursue her artistic freedom. And then we come to this painting, really one of the most heartbreaking paintings in the show, by Eldzier Cortor. And this is the painting that was the inspiration for today. Eldzier Cortor lived and worked mostly in Chicago, was a really important part of Chicago's art scene in 40s, 50s, 60s, and onward. But like many artists, he was able to get a grant to travel to the South to explore Southern art and culture and life and to document it. And he painted this picture when he got back, Southern Souvenir No. 2. And here we literally see it's Cortor's thinking about stories he'd heard, maybe things he'd seen about violence against black women in the South. So literally bodies torn apart, vulnerable. And this is a threat that existed all times of day, anywhere. So on the left-hand side of the composition, the figure is set in an interior, wallpaper. On the right-hand side, set out of doors in nature. The newspapers in the center are both the morning newspaper and the evening newspaper. So I think what Cortor is really trying to say here is this was an ever-present threat that people had to deal with and live in fear of, and he wanted to shine a light on it. You can see this paintings from the collection of Art Bridges. Art Bridges is a group organization formed in Arkansas. It was started by the same people as Crystal Bridges, the Museum there of American Art. It's basically a lending collection, so they have a large collection that museums can borrow from. They also foster, their goal is to have American art be more widespread in America, to bring American art to places that might not traditionally have it. So they foster collaborations among museums and help organize exhibitions. But when you borrow a painting of theirs for an exhibition, you can apply for a grant for funding to do a program in response to it. And so we felt like it was really important to do something that would acknowledge what we're seeing in this painting, but also try to find ways to move beyond that so we can talk about it, we can move forward, we can really kind of grapple with what the painting is telling us. And so one component of that we'll get into in a moment was working kind of with a program that Ruby Britt Height, my sadly former colleague, had started here, is having artists do responses to works and exhibitions. And because we had the funding to do it, this was the work that we asked 6 amazing local artists to respond to. So in just a moment, we will hear from Nellie Ashford, Princess Curator, John Miles, Georgina Kima, Jasne Norman, and Brenda Pinkston, who will talk just a little bit about the works that they created. After this part of the program is over, I'm going to invite you to join them upstairs on the mezzanine floor if you want to talk with them more directly about the works they created. But we'll have images of them, and they'll each come up and speak for 4 or 5 minutes about what inspired them to make the work they did. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ruby to talk a little bit more about what she's done here over the years and the Artist Response Program and why it's important to think more deeply about such a really difficult piece like Cortor's painting.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you here. I'm Ruby Britt Height, former director of community relations here at the Mint Museum for almost 17 years, and now I am community engagement director at WFAE-FM NPR station here in Charlotte. So I'm really honored to be back home and to be able to share with you today. Welcome to Amazing Grace, African American Stories of Strength, Courage, and Resilience here at the Mint. Thanks, Dr. Stuhlman. He and I have worked together for nearly 17 years and presented many programs around exhibitions that feature people of color, specifically those surrounding African American art and culture. The outstanding documentation, research, and cataloging of essays he and other art scholars have written for Southern Modern is to be recognized and commended greatly for this moment. It is historical that we have this kind of exhibition that covers Southern tragedies in a Southern museum. So John, to you and to all of those who work with you, we thank you for bringing this to Charlotte. This is the last stop of the exhibition, which has traveled to Memphis and other cities throughout the country. So it makes sense for its final step to be here back home. The works the Mint gathered for this exhibition, a reflection of life in the South, are juxtaposed next to the travesties of Black American life during the period covered in Southern Modern that John just shared with us, Dr. Stuhlman. I commend him and Director of Learning and Engagement, Cynthia Moreno, and her team for ensuring the programming and stories were and are being told to reflect the works and the people therein. On this day of the exhibition, we reflect and value the opening in October, where elders like artist storyteller Nellie Ashford, who's here with us today, and Lumbee Indian educator Barbara Locklear shared about what it was like in the early 1900s. Then an HBCU day was here in November with a conversation including former art educator, Congresswoman Alma Adams, who went to the Palmer Institute after Lois Mailou Jones, so she had great history to share, along with Dr. Leo Twiggs, the founder of South Carolina State University's art department and renowned painter. Exhibition essayist Dr. Shania Harris of Georgia's Museum of Art also wrote with John. And we also featured Dr. Danielle Taylor, curator of Clark Atlanta University. So we had a wealth of speakers who were here that day to share with us. And I commend you, everyone, for being a part of that process. There's a saying that whoever controls the narrative controls the story. This narrative is quite sobering, yet most appropriate in this beginning of February 2nd, with that opening Black History Month in America, and an appreciated closing day for this exhibition. This is the last day for Southern Modern, so make sure you get a chance to appreciate every component of it. I'm most honored and humbled to be a part of today's program and to have worked with both John and Cynthia to co-author and champion the award of the $20,000 grant we received from Art Bridges Foundation in Texas to present this today, Amazing Grace, African American Stories of Strength, Courage, and Resilience. It is very intense and comprehensive process to get that award, so it was a huge honor that we were able to go through a series of probably 4 or 5 interviews to be able to clarify what it was that we wanted to do with this kind of presentation to you and to get it approved. So please allow me to put this program further in context of how John has laid it so far. And as we begin February and Black History Month, founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926 with Negro History Week, and 1976, 50 years later, it became Black History Month. We value the opportunity to share about the African population that lay in the deep hulls of a slave ship, traveling for weeks and months to an unknown land to help build the economic foundation and backbone, richness, and history, not as immigrants, but as stolen and sometimes sold to become enslaved people from our home continent, which houses 54 countries. Sometimes we have to clarify to people that Africa is a continent. Today, we want to move forward with the program to look at the artwork, and specifically one piece from the Southern Modern exhibition, which John has shared with us. First, I'd like for us to pause in a moment of silence as we remember the millions of our ancestors, our being I am of African ancestry, and I speak from that context. As we remember the millions of our ancestors who were brought to this country as free and hidden labor, contributing to the economic growth of America. Yet, many died tragically during the Middle Passage in slave ship hulls, jumped aboard during transport, died during enslavement from hunger, health issues, or from a chattel system of enslavement that kept them often chained, beaten, starving, leather whipped, raped, beaten, or killed. We must know this history, have a Sankofa moment to look back and realize how far we've come, yet how far we have to go. The emancipation was 1861 to 1865, that's only 160 years ago. My great-great-grandmother was an enslaved Virginia woman who belonged to Billy Britt, and my name is Ruby Britt Height. Just 2 generations later, my father was one of 12 siblings who lived through the Jim Crow movement in Goochland County, Virginia, just a few miles west of Richmond, and Richmond is home of the Confederacy. I recall hearing white men calling my elder grandfather Miss Jimmy to avoid calling him Mr., which would acknowledge him as a man and on a balanced justice scale. I'm sorry, I accidentally hit that. Okay. They farmed, and this is my family, they farmed, learned, they were intelligent businessmen and leaders in the community, yet they were seldom referred to as Mr., Miss Jimmy, Miss Leroy. Many of the works in this exhibition are a reflection of the times in which parts of America beat and lynched blacks, including in the works by Lois Milo Jones, which is in the exhibition called Mob Victim, and the Hale Woodruff piece called Giddy Up. The latter piece depicts how black men would be noosed with the rope, secured on a tree branch. Then the lynch mob leader would say to the horse, "Giddy up," or I know because I grew up on a farm. And that's what my daddy used to say, "Giddy up," and the horse would move. So when he would say, "Giddy up," the horse would run, because they would usually hit him on the backside. But the hanged man would remain on the noose and swing like a pendulum, asphyxiated, sometimes tarred, feathered, or castrated. Yet still we rise. So today, we pause in a moment of remembrance and silence, out of love, appreciation, and respect to the men, women, and children whose lives were lost, then and continue to be, quietly and sometimes publicly. We would be remiss if we also didn't acknowledge with a shared humanity the devastating loss of those killed in 2 airplane crashes this week in Washington and Philadelphia. This is what we call being rooted and grounded in a shared humanity, when you care about other people. Within the context of this program and the mourning of this kind of loss on a Sunday morning like today, it wouldn't be surprising for an elder to begin what's referred to as call and response in the Black church. And join me if you know the words. Usually, an elder would stand up in the congregation, possibly from the deacon's corner, and he would begin to sing, "Amazing how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now we'd usually skip the verse, because sometimes the elders didn't always know the words. Some of them might have had a 3rd grade education, and they remembered. They remembered because they were taught from generation to generation what the words are. But then they pick up and they say, "When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Our hearts and thoughts are with these families from the past, from this past week, as we embrace our memories and our loved ones, and we exemplify and foster empathy, compassion, and a community grounded in a shared humanity. This exhibition covers the 1900 to 1955, which covers part of the Jim Crow era where human lynching of mostly African American men were lynched from 1882 to 1968. 1968? That's not that long ago. So the artwork, these 6 artists today, whom I'm so proud of, you did an outstanding job. You will see their work. our response to these emotional times. The history is not easily digestible. It doesn't make you feel comfortable. But think of the discomfort of the ones who lived through it. A Sankofa moment. We must look back and acknowledge that pain and that affirms the amazing grace of our people. And with the context, it was written by a slave ship owner who had a conversion. And there's hope for everybody to be converted. As my daddy would say, that's a sermon for another day. During that time, nearly 5,000 recorded lynchings occurred in the U.S., according to records by the NAACP. Some elders in Mecklenburg County recall the incidents and where they occurred. Artist Mama Nellie Ashford is a fabulous storyteller, and you're going to hear from her in a moment, but she shared some of those. And she'll say, and I know a man who knew the corner where that happened. The Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery notes that it's hard to tell as no formal records were kept of the lynchings. But we know that they occurred mostly in Mississippi, Georgia, and Texas. Black people were the primary victims of the lynchings, but so were Latin Americans. Lynchings were documented with postcards, picnics, family gatherings, and photo opportunities as townspeople gathered to witness the tragedy. The postcards showed men, women, and children posed next to the hanged victims, often charred bodies referred to as barbecue, often held on Sunday afternoons after church. A noose is a rope weapon and is a symbol of violence and oppression towards African Americans. The exhibition painting Lois Mailou Jones' captured mob victim and what John has shared with us so far are a reflection of artists giving their social justice responses. Singer Billie Holiday sang about those lynchings in a song called Strange Fruit, written by a New York Jewish American school teacher named Abel Mirapol. The haunting words echoed out. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. The work of art that we share with you today by Eldzier Cortor, born in Richmond, Virginia, my homeboy, was remembrance of his travels down south, and despite his studies at the Art Institute and being able to cover Southern life in Chicago, he was greatly influenced in the 1940s in the Gullah's rich African heritage in South Carolina and Georgia. And it was those Black bodies that he remembered as he painted and did this particular piece. He once said, "The Black woman represents the Black race." Cortor captured time after time in his works the Black female narrative. This life-changing experience with the Gullah people at our neighboring South Carolina resonated with him and inspired his works to piece together what he did. To this piece, as I have rendered this next part to Mother Nellie Ashford. So in 1948, artist Cortor created Southern Souvenir No. 2. The word souvenir recalls the horrifying practice of Southern lynchings, where body parts of Black victims were often taken and regarded as trophies. The disembodied figures, the nude female torso strewn among gnarled branches, are remnants of domestic life. The female is not only torn apart physically, but also stripped of her dignity, her identity, calling attention to the racial issues of this period. The newspaper seen in the center of the painting depict the southern states that infamously practiced this kind of thing. Symbols of decline, including torn paper, a decaying tree, and a crumbling plastic facet, further evoke the dismal existence of Southern Black Americans during this time. The piece speaks to the tattered view of Blacks, especially the female. She is nameless, faceless, without identity, a sexual object, and disposable to the assault of those who thrusted themselves upon her. She is relegated amidst, in her beautiful anatomy of shape, brown skin, contoured hips, and a mother's breast, to nurture even white babies of her milk as a wet nurse from enslavement. She is nameless and faceless, as Blacks were and sometimes still are today, but she has a cross on her neck that symbolizes the hope. Artist Nellie Ashford.
Good evening, everybody. I'm born 1943. My people who raised me were born 1893. Mama's birthday was Saturday, January 31st, 1893. That old girl would have been 132 years old. Because of that old girl and that old man who was in World War I, who went to the first grade, and that's as far as he went. He was a farmer in this space that sold to the folk in the city. Daddy walked from Batesford Road with a sack on his back. I don't need a mic. A sack on his back to sell his vegetables at a stand on Trade Street. And he walked all the way back down Batesford Road to take himself to fill that white man's truck early in the morning. And he bought a farm in 1909 in Oakdale. And because of those old people in my daddy's footsteps, I'm able to stand here, people, and tell you I'm among the oldest African Americans that was legally adopted in this city. That wee bit that I talked about, people, with pain in my hip, I'm going to tell you about my piece. I honored the lady that we drop our head about. That's the lady of the night who used to sell her body to pay to buy food for her children. We always used to look down at her. And that's why I painted about her. I honored those women whose names were sometimes taunted because of what she had to do to feed her family. And I thought about Henrietta Lacks, and those of you who remember reading about her. I also thought about Sarah Bachman, whose body had those curves that they just talked about. And at the ending part of my thought, I thought about that woman who had to sell her body to pay for food for her children, that we so often kind of dropped our heads about. And the only time she got her name in the paper was when they arrested her for trying to do something that the money didn't show when she went to the store to feed her children. So if you can see, I made it kind of like, so you can see she had dignity still. But if you look real close, you'll see the city in the background. You'll see a person whose body is barely seen sitting on that bed And that's why I created it, and it's called, Now Call Me Missy.
Artist Nellie actually has 2 works owned by the Mint Museum here on view. And if you ever go in concourse, international concourse at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, you will see her mural on the wall. Princess Curator.
Good afternoon. I was so inspired by this exhibition, Southern Modern, that I began to do a lot of research, and it became very personal for me. And as I looked, I decided long on that Cortor's piece was very important to me. And so what I'm about to read you is a paper that I wrote reflecting Black women and my personal history and to present being. And I have points, just points that stood out to me, which is just passages about short history of how we rose, how we rise. Okay? The title of my piece, as you can see, is Give Her Her Flowers. And the flowers, of course, are cotton surrounding her. Okay? I'll start by telling you what I saw as the obstacles of African American women and what they endured throughout history. In the early 20th century, Black women in the United States were often confined to roles in farm labor and domestic service, reflecting deeply entrenched racial and gender hierarchies. As modernization and industrialization progressed, opportunities for better paying jobs increased, but Black women were largely excluded from these advancements. Instead, they were funneled into low-paying, undesirable positions that reinforced their marginalization. The Jim Crow laws. Throughout history, African American women have endured countless obstacles. The passage of the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, and it granted citizenship and legal rights to Black Americans and formerly enslaved individuals by including a phrase, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. And just a side note, people are trying to change that as we speak. Okay? And they were entitled to equal protection under the law. However, the amendment did not protect against state and local statutes under the Jim Crow law, which legalized racial segregation and upheld systematic discrimination for decades. My own mother grew up during the Jim Crow South. Born in 1927 in South Carolina, she became a widow at 41 and raised 5 of her 9 children alone under these oppressive laws. 4 of her children, including myself, were adopted or raised by relatives. My mother, Molly, worked as a housekeeper for wealthy white families for over 45 years. And as I can remember, she never received a raise, health insurance, or retirement benefits from her employer. She continued working full-time this way until her death at the age of 84. Okay, the 19th Amendment and our fight for voting rights. The passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920 granted women the right to vote, but white suffrage groups largely disbanded, failing to support Black women's continued struggle against discriminatory state laws and policies. Tactics such as lynching, rape, poll taxes, and literacy tests were designed and utilized to prevent Black women from exercising their right to vote. However, when it comes to Black women, there's always a however. Despite these barriers, Black women have a long history of creating spaces for themselves to overcome invisibility and oppression. Our ancestral Black sisters fought through activism clubs, grassroots organizations, settlement houses, and schools, pushing forward the fight for equality and justice. Now, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, this inequity persisted. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that a broader range of occupations began to open up for Black women. This era brought some advancements by challenging discriminatory practices. Yet, systematic inequities still persisted. Even today, the occupational structure of the U.S. remains heavily influenced by gender and racial stereotypes, limiting Black women's access to leadership roles and equitable pay. This ongoing marginalization is starkly evident in major societal events like the 2024 presidential election, which highlighted the continued undervaluation and restriction of Black women's contribution to this society. Along came affirmative action. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued an executive order, also known as affirmative action. We know what's happening there, which prohibited employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, and national origin for those organizations receiving federal contracts and subcontracts. However, in a recent turn of events, the Supreme Court has overturned what was described as this practice of race-conscious admissions policies in colleges, arguing that they violated the 14th Amendment. More recently, our new leadership issued an executive order to eliminate DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, initiatives claiming that they promoted discrimination and should be replaced with merit-based opportunities under the same executive order that originally aimed to combat employment discrimination. I struggle to understand how anyone can equate DEI with discrimination, whether in word or practice. It seems that in today's society, diversity and equity are only considered legal when referring to stocks and investments. In a society where statistics have repeatedly shown that marginalized communities, racially, economic, and social, are disproportionately affected by this elimination and these safeguards, it raises a critical question. For a population that has been historically segregated, discriminated against, and marginalized in America, we must ask, what is the true intent of our leadership? And how exactly does DEI harm the larger society? I have my theory, one that I will not share today, but I will ask you to ponder your own. I also ask myself, exactly who gets to decide if I'm worthy and deserving of merit? If I'm as educated and as intelligent as my counterpart, will I have to worry once more about the color of my skin, my gender, or where I came from? Because, as we all know, Merit can be subjective. In addition, will being Black and female, a double minority in this society, limit my opportunity, our opportunity for merit even further? Black women in America today, according to the 2024 census, the white population in America is 58.5. The Hispanic population is 19.5, and the Black population is 14.4. However, women make up 50.5 of the US total population. White women at 30.7, the largest gender ethnic bloc in the United States, while Black women make up only 7.8 of the population in this country. So, what does this all mean for the Black woman in America? This means that we have to speak louder than ever, show up and be more visible in spaces we've not ever been invited to before, and most importantly, hold our sister's hand as we enter the room together. Being proactive and supportive can help move that needle towards our goal of equity, self-sufficiency, security, economic opportunity, and advancement on numerous platforms. This must be a collective effort, made possible through solidarity and persistence, even in the absence of legislative mandates. We don't need them. While legal and societal structures may pose obstacles, unity and determination can pave the way for change. In my artwork is a visual metaphor for the struggle that Black women continue to face in America. The figure is not merely trying to shatter a glass ceiling, which is a phrase often used with progress in today's society, but she is fighting to break free from the walls of systematic oppression. The glowing passage in my piece symbolizes hope, progress, and a path for change. That's a call to arms.
Thank you for your call to action. So in the next orders, and I'm going to say the next artist, John Miles, then Georgie Nakima, Jasnae Norman, and Brenda Pinkston. In writing the grant, it was a specific directive that we only have African American women to respond. However, we made a modification and we fought for that change because the Black male perspective is very important to have because they are fathers, they are sons, they have daughters, and they deserve the voice as well.
Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right. As I began working on Auntie Bella, a play off of Antebellum South, my visual response to Curator Souvenir No. 2. I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. This piece became more than simply art. It became a responsibility to confront the brutal truths of the antebellum South and the horrors and countless Black women who were forced into an unimaginable servitude as wet nurses. These women were robbed of their agency, their dignity, and their humanity. They were compelled to nourish the children of their oppressors, while their own children were torn from their arms, sold off, neglected, and left to perish. The shackles in this image are not just chains of iron. They are the unbreakable bonds of systemic oppression. They symbolize how Black women were enslaved not only in body, but also in spirit and mind. They were denied the most sacred of rights, the right to mother their own children, to nurture their own families, while being forced to sustain the lives of others. Yet even in the face of such dehumanization, the Black woman endured. She persevered. The Black woman found ways to survive, to resist, and most importantly, to have hope. But let us not mistake survival for justice. Let us not confuse endurance with freedom. Today, the legacy of this burden still persists. Society still leans on the Black woman to carry the weight of the world, to fix it, to provide, to heal, to lead, often without acknowledgement, without support, and without rest. The Black woman has become the backbone of many communities, the keepers of hope, the architects of change. Yet too often, they're expected to bear these roles at the expense of their own well-being. As a Black man, I created Auntie Bella, not just as a tribute, but as a reckoning. It is a reminder of my responsibility and our collective responsibilities to honor the sacrifice of the Black woman, not just in words, but in action, to stand beside them, to uplift them, to fight for them, as they have fought for us over and over again. Black women has always risen to the occasion. They have fought for our freedoms, nourished generations after generations after generations, and they have carried the weight of the world that often takes the labor for granted. Again, Auntie Bella is more than a reflection of the past. It serves as a mirror held up to the present. It is a call to action, a demand for justice, for equality, for recognition. It is a challenge to all of us to see Black women, to hear Black women, to celebrate Black women, not just for what they have done, but for who they are, not just for their strengths, but for their humanity, not just for their resilience, but for the right for them to get some rest, to thrive, and to be free. Let this piece remind us that the fight is not over. It will never be over. Let it inspire us to build a world where the Black women are not just supposed to support, but to celebrate, where their worth is not just acknowledged, but cherished, where their voices are not just heard, but amplified. This is our duty. This is our promise. This is our call to action. Thank you. So, thank you. I didn't know where to put that. So just a quick reminder, not reminder, but when you go see this piece, just look closely. There's some little hidden gems in this quilt work. If you all understand in the history of storybook quilts, there are some hidden images within the storybook quilt. My mom doesn't know it, but where mom at? Raise your hand. Okay, my mom's over here. She doesn't even know it, but I snuck a picture of her, and she's actually in the piece, and she doesn't know it. She's on the left side with the red blanket. I caught her when she was sleeping. But also in the piece, there are QR codes hidden. I think there's about 8 of them. So the QR codes directly link to the images that you see hidden in the picture. Again, thank you.
Thank you, John. Georgina Kima.
Ooh, that was tough to follow. Can we just give him a finger snap real quick? And can we give a finger snap to Miss Ruby Britt while we're all here? We appreciate you, sister. Thank you for the efforts. So my name is Georgina Kima, and to introduce myself, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I work on the intersection of public art, storytelling, and cultural memory. I've created Garden of Journey as my creative platform. Gardner Journey is also my Instagram, TikTok, and website. But yes, I use these themes as a means of connection, education, and reclamation. Growing up as a young girl in the South, I endured a lot of colorism, a lot of ageism, just a lot of society telling me who I am and who I'm not. So I use this work to really share who I really am. Much of my work exists in public spaces where I engage with communities through large-scale murals and sculptures, but when I was invited to create this piece and be a part of this work, it was really an honor because it allowed me to return to my studio practice and contribute to a broader conversation about history, freedom, and transformation in a more intimate setting. So this piece is called Sovereign Rising. This piece is a contemplative exploration of sovereignty. When I think about just the traumas and what we've endured as a people, I wanted to just reclaim some of our power back because ultimately no one can take from you what you couldn't give to them, what you didn't give to them. So I wanted to show how autonomy has been stripped away and how, we can give that back to ourselves. It pays tributes to those who were lost during the transatlantic slave trade, particularly those who chose the ocean over enslavement, which is where certain water themes that you can see. I also wanted to reframe death not as an ending, but as an act of agency, a reclamation of self in the face of brutality. When I think about the wicked violence that was inflicted on our ancestors, my first instinct is anger. And this anger is my alchemy, and this work is my response to it. My question is, how do we reclaim what was stolen, and how do we transform from martyrs to superheroes? A lot of work and a lot of representation around Blackness and womanhood is centered around the victimization. And I want to look at us as through eyes of resilience. So the ocean serves both as a witness and a history and a metaphor for duality. It's freedom and constraint. It's resilience and surrender. And at the heart of the work is a figure inspired by the African mermaid theme. I wanted to kind of center something that is in a millennial timestamp, just because the history is also in the present and it's also informing our future. So I wanted to just kind of see the present young Black woman as the subject, not as something of antiquity, but something that lives through today. It's very present in 2025. It lives through our DNA, and it lives through the moment. So across various traditions, the mermaid represents survival, power, and transformation in the face of adversity. So this imagery to me speaks to enduring strength of Black women throughout history, those who have continuously redefined what it means to claim dignity and power. Ultimately, Sovereign Rising is about how freedom is not just a physical state, but a spiritual and ancestral force that moves through time. My hope is that this piece invites viewers to reflect on the resilience embedded in history and the ways we continue to honor those who came before us.
Thank you, Georgie. Jasnay, will you come join us? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I feel since being here, I've been pushed and challenged in my works, and this particular showcasing has allowed me to break the disconnect and stagnancy I've been feeling in my works. I usually create hyperrealism pieces, and I've been craving to connect with spirit and wanting to create from my mind instead of the portraits. I titled my piece Beyond the Field because I was very intentional with my choices of attire, the placements, and the color palette in the painting. I took the exhibition literally and incorporated the cotton field as the southern element for my piece, as the mothership hovering over them is my modern. In addition, the mothership represents modern-day beliefs that some have about their ancestors being on the motherships and watching over us. I personally like to dive into the rabbit holes a few times myself, so it's a topic I've dived into and felt it resonated in its way. So I incorporated it to draw in attention and the intent on wanting the viewer to think beyond what were taught, and though our history has shown. Will we know present day about the terms, the UFO, or the mothership? I also wanted to dress the attire of the people in the Black Panther Party attire to represent the intellect, the pride, and also the dignity and the guidance they represented in the civil rights and the end of Jim Crow era in the late 1960s. The crowd faces the mothership as a sign of collective consciousness and awakening, something that could alter the understanding of the world and their place in it. Overall, I wanted my painting to be and bring a sense of empowerment, of knowing who we are as a collective, and also with the chance of having the opportunity to change the narrative of Beyond the Fields. Again, I'm grateful for this opportunity, and this is my piece, Beyond the Field.
Jasne is one of our newer artists, self-taught, and you have a mixed array of talents here. What you see is called Afrofuturism, and this is the depiction of Black folk in the future. And so as a young artist, she is a reflection of what she just presented to us. So Brenda, your turn. Brenda Pinkston.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd first like to thank Dr. Jonathan Stuhlman and Ms. Ruby Britt Height for allowing all of us to have this wonderful opportunity and experience. It has been really life-changing for me. I just have to tell you, the image you see here is nothing like the initial image that I painted, maybe sketched. The initial image, probably the top and the bottom was in the initial image, but the middle piece, the torso, was completely different, more like a tornado, a hurricane. So, but after I started doing some research, and I have to read it too, I'm sorry. As a visual artist, painting is often a visionary act, an expression of perspective, ideas, and emotion, but it can also be something deeper, a process of discovery, meditation, and transformation, a journey, if you will. A journey where the destination is unknown, yet creative spirit compels you to follow, trusting in a higher power to lead you to something meaningful. That precisely is what happened to me during this project. While researching Southern Souvenir No. 2 by Eldzier Cortor, I delve into the disturbing history of unimaginable atrocities endured by African women. From the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade to the brutalities of American slavery and the disrespecting during Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Civil Rights era, to the systemic inequalities we still battle today, including those underscored by the Black Lives Matter movement. I braced myself for anger, sorrow, and an overwhelming weight of historical injustices. But something unexpected emerged, discovery. It reminded me that art is not only a reflection of history, but also a tool for healing and reclaiming our narratives. Through my research, I encountered voices of African American historians, psychologists, and spiritual leaders, some who I had the privilege of knowing personally, while others I found along this journey. They guided me towards a profound truth and a deeper understanding of the African woman. What resonated most deeply was the African woman, better yet, well, I had said the African American woman, but the African woman cannot be defined by what we have endured, but by who we are. This realization inspired this title of this piece, Who We Are, the Mother of All Humanity. Science confirms that humanity traces back to an African woman, often referred to as a mitochondrial Eve, who lived in East Africa around 200,000 years ago. My painting, Who We Are, reflects the divinity of birth, resilience, strength, and an unparalleled beauty of African women. The piece incorporates the deep, dark richness of her skin, textured layers of hair, and golden hues of sunlight and jewels adorn her body, each holding symbolic meaning. Her crown features the scarab beetle, symbolizing rebirth, and the rising sun. Her gold cuffs on each side, one, the Sokofa bird, which reminds a reminder to learn from your past and to build a future. And Mahat, the goddess of truth, justice, and order, is on her other cuff. And over her pregnant belly represents motherhood. The uterus, it's over the uterus, the ovaries, and it symbolizes life of the motherhood. It is called the Ankh. And she walks amongst the soot plant. The soot plant is a symbolic plant in ancient Kemet, which symbolizes royalty. On the hieroglyphics, if you see the hieroglyphics, they're always holding this soot plant. So it's highly symbolized. This piece seeks to celebrate our identity and collective journey while affirming our power to define ourselves. Eldzier Cortor's Southern Souvenir No. 2 was a profound inspiration for this work, showing how art can confront painful truths while illuminating beauty, because this is who we are. And I hope Who We Are sparks conversations about the power of art and to confront history, celebrate identity, and inspire hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to all of the artists for your inspirational works. We really appreciate it. I'm going to wrap things up quickly. We're going to do a quick picture with the artists, so if you'll let them come up and get their photo taken. After that, we're going to ask if they would come up to the mezzanine level, a level right above the atrium, where their works are on view. If you all would like to come and talk to them there, that would be wonderful. We have another program, part of the program, starting a little bit after 3:30, also on the mezzanine level up in our boardroom there, over to the left. That is a program with counselors Dr. Lizette Torres, Danielle Coleman, and Reverend Carla Patterson, where we'll be discussing how to identify, how to help, how to bring light to victims of domestic abuse and human trafficking, among other things. So continuing our dialogue about what we see in the Cortor painting today. Looking to move forward from that. You'll see also throughout the museum, there are tours in Southern Modern. There's an art-making activity for families out in the atrium. We have another set of jazz right now, and then also one a little bit later on today with Q. Quentin Talley. And finally, thank you all so much for coming.